to wit. In May 2008, the U.S. government reported to the United Nations that it had been holding upwards of 2,500 children under the age of 18 as enemy combatants at detention centers in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo Bay, where there was a special center, Camp Iguana, established just for holding children. The length of these detentions has frequently exceeded a year, and in some cases has stretched to 5 years. Some of these detainees have reached adulthood in detention and are not now being reported as child detainees because they're no longer children. In addition to detaining children as enemy combatants, it's been widely reported in media reports that the U.S. military in Iraq has, based upon Pentagon rules of engagement, been treating boys as young as 14 years of age as potential combatants, subject to arrest and even to being killed. In Fallujah, in the days ahead of the November 2004 all-out assault, Marines ringing the city were reported to be turning back into the city men and boys of combat age who were trying to flee the impending seat of battle, an act which in itself is a violation of Geneva Conventions, which require combatants to permit anyone, combatants as well as civilians, to surrender and to leave the scene of battle. Under the Fourth Geneva Convention, to which the United States has been a signatory since 1949, children under the age of 15 captured in conflicts, even if they've been fighting, are to be considered victims, not prisoners. In 2002, the United States signed the optional protocol to the Geneva Convention on the Rights of the Child on the involvement of children in armed conflict, which raised this age for this category of protected persons to 18. The continued detention of such children, some as young as 10 years of age, by the U.S. military, is a violation of both the Convention and the Protocol, and as such constitutes a war crime for which the President, as Commander-in-Chief, bears full responsibility. In all these actions and decisions, President George W. Bush has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as President and Commander-in-Chief, and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, President George W. Bush, by such conduct, is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Article 21. Misleading Congress and the American people about threats from Iran and supporting terrorist organizations within Iran with the goal of overthrowing the Iranian government. In his conduct while President of the United States, George W. Bush, in violation of his constitutional oath to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, has both personally and acting through his agents and subordinates misled the Congress and the citizens of the United States about a threat of nuclear attack from the nation of Iran. The National Intelligence Estimate released to Congress and the public on December 4, 2007, which confirmed that the government of the nation of Iran had ceased any efforts to develop nuclear weapons, was completed in 2006. Yet the President and his aides continued to suggest during 2007 that such a nuclear threat was developing and might already exist. National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley stated at the time, the National Intelligence Estimate regarding Iran was released, that the President had been briefed on its findings in the last few months. Hadley's statement establishes a timeline that shows the President knowingly sought to deceive Congress and the American people about a nuclear threat that did not exist. Hadley has stated that the President, quote, was basically told, stand down, and yet the President and his aides continued to make false claims about the prospect that Iran was trying to build a nuclear weapon that could lead to World War III. This evidence establishes that the President actively engaged in and had full knowledge of a campaign by his administration to make a false case for an attack on Iran, thus warping the national security debate at a critical juncture and creating the prospect of an illegal and unnecessary attack on a sovereign nation. Even after the national intelligence estimate was released to Congress and the American people, the President stated he didn't believe anything had changed and suggested he and members of administration would continue to argue that Iran should be seen as posing a threat to the United States. He did this despite the fact that the United States Intelligence Agency had clearly and officially stated this was not the case. Evidence suggests that the Bush administration's attempts to portray Iran as a threat are part of a broader U.S. policy towards Iran. On September 30, 2001, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld established an official military objective of overturning the regime in Iran, as well as those in Iraq, Syria, and 4 other countries in the Middle East, according to a document quoted in then Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Douglas Feith's book, War and Decision. General Wesley Clark reports in his book, Winning Modern Wars, being told by a friend in the Pentagon in November 2001 that the list of governments that Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz planned to overthrow included Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya, Sudan, and Somalia. Clark writes that the list also included Lebanon. Journalist Gareth Porter reported in May 2008 asking Feith at a public event which of the 6 regimes on the Clark list were included in the Rumsfeld paper, to which Feith replied, all of them. Rumsfeld's aides also drafted a second version of the paper as instructions to all military commanders in the development of campaign plans against terrorism. The paper called for military commanders to assist other government agencies as directed, to encourage populations dominated by terrorist organizations or their supporters to overthrow that domination. In January 2005, Seymour Hersh reported in the New Yorker magazine that the Bush administration had been conducting secret reconnaissance missions inside Iran at least since the summer of 2004. In June 2005, former United Nations weapons inspector Scott Ritter reported that the United States security forces had been sending members of the Mujahideen al-Haq MEK into Iranian territory. The MEK had been designated a terrorist organization by the United States, the European Union, Canada, Iraq, and Iran. Ritter reported that the United States Central Intelligence Agency had used the MEK to carry out remote bombings in Iran. In April 2006, Hersh reported in the New Yorker magazine that U.S. combat troops had entered and were operating in Iran, where they were working with minority groups, including the Azuris, the Balukis, and the Kurds. In April 2006, Larissa Alexandrova reported on Raw Story that the U.S. Department of Defense was working with and training the MEK, or former members of the MEK, sending them to commit acts of violence in southern Iran in areas where recent attacks had left many dead. Raw Story reported that the Pentagon had adopted the policy of supporting MEK shortly after the 2003 invasion of Iraq and in response to the influence of Vice President Richard B. Cheney's office.